So Sherry has given me the honor of introducing a very good and dear friend of mine, Shelia Polk. When I was installed, I guess you would call it, to the city council, I called and asked Sheila if she would do the installation for me and give me my oath of office. I just love her. She's one amazing lady. Shelia Polk, County Attorney for Yavapai County, is a native Arizonan who received her bachelor's degree and law degree from Arizona State University, go Devils. After clerking for Arizona Supreme Court Justice Jack Hayes, Ms. Polk served in the Arizona Attorney General's office for 11 years before moving to Yavapai County in 1994. There she joined the Yavapai County Attorney's Office, where she specialized in the prosecution of felony crimes, including elder abuse, sexual offenses, and repeat felony offenders. In November of 2000, Shelia Polk became the first woman to be elected to the position of Yavapai County Attorney and is currently serving her 5th term in this office. Absolutely. In addition to overseeing a staff of 90 employees, a budget of $7 million, and active prosecutions, Shelia Polk has found time to be in the forefront of change in our community. She is an active member of the Governor's Arizona Human Trafficking Council, where she chairs the Victim Services Committee. In 2016, she served the Governor's Sexual Assault Evidence Collection Kit Task Force, and Ms. Polk is the state chairman for both the Arizona Prosecuting Attorneys Advisory Council and Arizona Criminal Justice Commission. Ms. Polk is co-chair and founding member of MATFORCE, the Yavapai County Substance Abuse Coalition, nationally awarded the 2013 Outstanding Coalition of the Year by the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of the United States of America. Ms. Polk is driving the stimulus behind the nationally renowned law enforcement course, What You Do Matters, Lessons from the Holocaust. In 2011, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum recognized Shelia Polk for her accomplishments as a national tribute at a national tribute dinner in Phoenix. Shelia Polk and all that she does, if it's something good that's going on in Yavapai County, I will guarantee you Shelia Polk has a part of that. She's an amazing lady. She's married to Tom Polk, and they have 3 sons. And I'm very proud to also say that Shelia Polk was a big sister, and her little sister is now 19. So she's big now. Welcome, please, Shelia Polk.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. What a beautiful, diverse group of women here. It really is my pleasure to take some time to offer you a few comments. You know, it's funny, Billy mentioned the election season that we all just survived. And when we were asked to take a moment to think about what we were grateful for, my mind immediately went to, I'm so grateful that that election is over. And those endless commercials and flyers and phone calls and all of that, we can enjoy a little peace. But I thought I would share with you a story about my first campaign, just because it's lighthearted and it's a story that always comes to mind and brings a smile to my face when I think of this story. Because my first campaign was in the year 2000, running for county attorney, and our 3 sons at the time were 11, 13, and 15. And now they're adults. They're all 3 actually are lawyers and married. And my husband and I now have our first grandson, who's almost 5 months old. So that's really cool. But that first campaign, one Saturday afternoon, I was driving around town with our youngest son, Matthew, who was 11. And it was late afternoon, and we were driving back home. And I had on the car radio the Prairie Home Companion show with Garrison Keillor. And I really was just we were both a little bit zoned out. But the show, Garrison Keillor was doing a spoof on the presidential election that year. And he had a couple of candidates, and the first candidate was saying, if you elect me as your president, I'm going to have 3-day work weeks and 4-day weekends. And the second candidate said, if you elect me as your president, I'm going to deliver every Saturday morning freshly baked chocolate chip cookies to every household across America. But I didn't really think about it. My son and I didn't talk about it. And then a few days later at dinner, my son very seriously says, Mom, you know that man who's running for president who's going to deliver freshly baked chocolate chip cookies to every house? Do you think he has a chance of winning? So let's lay to rest that last election and move on with getting through our lives and our jobs and everything else we do. I was asked to focus my comments on what inspires me. And I think, like most of you, lots of things inspire me, lots of people inspire me. But I'm really drawn to talk to you about the one thing that has inspired me more deeply than anything else in my life and continues to inspire me to this day. And it's the work I do around teaching lessons from the Holocaust. So I'd like to tell you the story of how I got involved in it and then why I think it is so important. My involvement began back in 2006 when I was approached by members of the Jewish Community Foundation for Greater Prescott. Pam Jones actually is sitting at my table. Christine Resnick is the new executive director. I didn't know Pam then. She's not the one who approached me. But I was approached in my role as county attorney, and I was asked if I would go back to Washington, D.C., to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and if I would take a course there called Law Enforcement in Society, Lessons from the Holocaust. And I was asked if I would go with a group of other civic leaders from the Prescott area. And my reaction immediately was, well, what does the Holocaust have to do with me and my job as county attorney? And then my second reaction was, is there a problem in my office? Is that why you want me to go take this course? So I was reassured, no problem in my office, and I was asked if I would just go participate. And many years ago, I developed the motto for myself, which is, I try to say yes to experiences unless I can articulate a good reason to say no. And so I said yes. And I went back to Washington, D.C., to the museum in March of 2006, and truly had a profoundly moving experience where I went from someone who thought the Holocaust, it's a horrific event, doesn't really have much to do with me, to someone who today makes all of my decisions within the framework of the lessons of the Holocaust. And by the way, I'm not Jewish. The foundation now says I can be an honorary Jew, but I'm Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I'm a practicing Catholic. And I had read, Anne Frank, the Diary of Anne Frank, and had studied a little bit about the Holocaust in school, but that was the extent of my information about the Holocaust. But I really left the museum on fire that day. And what I learned that day in the museum when I took the course was that the Holocaust Museum teaches this course to this day to law enforcement professionals who reside in the area of Washington, D.C. The FBI, for example, the Metropolitan Police Department, those who can make a day trip and spend the day in the museum. And I also learned that the origin of that course that the museum teaches began with the police commissioner for the Metropolitan Police Department. His name is Charles Ramsey. He's no longer there, but in 1998, he had just been hired as the new police chief for the Washington Police Force. And as one of his official duties, he was asked to come take the tour of the museum, which he did. And Chief Ramsey says he left the museum that day feeling haunted, but he couldn't put his finger on what was bothering him. And so a couple days later, on his own, he went back to the museum, toured the exhibit, and he says he got off the elevator at the 4th floor, which is how you begin the tour, and there immediately it hit him what was bothering him, because it was an image of a German police officer marching hand in hand with an SS officer. And so Chief Ramsey said to himself, I don't get it. The role of police officers is to protect and serve all of our citizens. So how was it that the Holocaust even happened? And so Chief Ramsey called the museum educators back up and he asked that question of them. And interestingly, the museum opened its doors in 1993. By 1998, millions of people had toured that exhibit, and nobody had ever asked that question. And so the educators embarked on trying to answer that question, and working with Chief Ramsey, developed the course that they now teach today, and the course that I took. So fast forward back to 2006, I really could not sleep that night after taking the course. And what really had struck me was how relevant the events leading up to the Holocaust are to my profession as a prosecutor and to the profession of our police officers. And so I was really just, I was ignited. I was on fire with the idea that I wanted this course to come back to my office so that my prosecutors could take it, to come back to Yavapai County so our police officers here could take it. And the next day I got on the airplane, flew back to Phoenix, and by the time I landed in Phoenix, I was thinking, I want this course for all of our police officers and prosecutors in Arizona. And so I reached back out to members of the Jewish Community Foundation, and then together we reached out to the educators at the Holocaust Museum and expressed our desire to work with the museum to see if we could develop a course that we could offer here in Arizona. We would love to be able to send all of our criminal justice professionals back to the museum, but obviously that would be cost prohibitive. So we made that request of the museum, and it still astonishes me today that the museum said yes. They said, yes, we will work with your team from Prescott, Arizona, and see if we can develop a course that can be taught in Arizona. And so we embarked on this remarkable partnership with the museum, worked with them for the next several years. I got to take trips back to the museum to learn more and more, and eventually we developed a course that we teach now. Our first class was offered here in Yavapai County in 2012, and we have been teaching the class ever since, now all across Arizona. So we've now taught more than 4,000 police officers and prosecutors who practice here in Arizona. And we continue to do more and more outreach with the goal of reaching all of our criminal justice professionals. But I want to tell you a little bit about this course and why I think it's so impactful. We teach a 3.5-hour class, and we teach it in small groups of somewhere between 40 to 60 criminal justice professionals. We start by giving our folks some history, and we do that through some posters, and we do it through a couple of films. And then the bulk of our time is spent studying photographic images of policing in Germany between 1933 and 1942. Now, the mass killings, the acts of genocide that ultimately result in the murder of 6 million Jews and about 5 million other religious, political, or disabled dissidents, the Roma, for example, those mass killings really start in 1941, and they don't end until the end of 1945, the end of World War II. But in our course, we spend time looking at the events leading up to that period. When we think of the Holocaust, most of us naturally think about the period of the mass genocide. But what we do in our class is look at a series of photographic images identified by our museum educators that depict policing between 1933 and 1942. And through this progression of these images, what our students come to understand is that very incrementally, the purpose of policing was shifting. So the activity of policing is essentially staying the same as police officers investigate and do arrests. But the purpose of their policing activities, heavily influenced, of course, by the Nazis, it shifts very dramatically during those 9 short years from being protectors of the people to being enforcers of Nazi ideology. And in fact, by 1942, throughout really the this period, we have many examples of police officers directly involved in the deportation of Jews, and then directly involved in the actual killing by participating in the mobile killing squads. And so that's really what we look at with our students is, how is it in 9 short years that this profession of neutral, trusted police officers in Germany shifted so dramatically from protectors of the people to enforcers of Nazi ideology. After we do that work with them, we then have them focus on, well, what can we learn from this? Is this just history, or is it somehow relevant to what I do as a prosecutor? Is it somehow relevant to what a police officer does as a law enforcement officer? So we conclude our class by really focusing on what we call our lessons, where the students themselves identify that slippery slope and focus on how they can take measures to make sure they never go down that slippery slope. Now, the class is not about comparing ourselves to Nazis. It's not about calling police officers Nazis. It's not suggesting that any police officer who starts down the slippery slope is going to end up participating in acts of mass genocide, but it is about creating a culture within ourselves as prosecutors and police officers that ensures that we are always operating with integrity and always observing the rights and the privileges of all of our citizens and residents when we go about our job. So I want to share some of the lessons that our students identify. Here's a few of them from one of our classes. Be constantly vigilant. Avoid complacency. Challenge authority and ask questions. Keep politics out of policing. Care about the laws and the people and people's rights. Speak out and take action against injustice. Solve problems with equality. Respond to behavior, not to appearances. Constantly seek education. Remember that our Bill of Rights applies to everyone. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. Beware of blurring of lines. Silence is tacit agreement. Know when to draw the line and when to speak up, and have the courage to do the right thing. Just a few of the lessons. I can tell you that with each class, our students pretty consistently come up with very similar lessons. You know, as part of the work that I do around teaching from the Holocaust, I had the extraordinary opportunity last month to take a trip to Europe. My husband and I went with Pam and her husband, and then one of the educators from the Holocaust Museum came with us. So it was an extraordinary opportunity. And the focus of our trip really was, we called it our Holocaust tour. Now, I had never been to any of the concentration camps or any of the killing centers, even though I've now been teaching around the Holocaust for more than 12 years. And so it was a trip I really wanted to do, but it was also a trip, I really didn't want to do, just because I knew it was going to be very, very difficult and sobering, which it was. We visited 3 different death camps. In Poland, we visited Auschwitz-Birkenau and Majdanek. We visited in Germany, we visited Dachau, and then we also visited in the Czech Republic the camp of Theresienstadt. And I can tell you I'm really glad I did it, but it was very, very difficult. It's one thing to read, but it's another thing to be there and to be in these camps that were literally factories of death. I mean, we were in one camp in Auschwitz-Birkenau, where as far as you can see are the barracks, or where the barracks used to be, where you can see at the far end, you can see where the gas chambers and the crematoria were. And all I could think of was, this is such a mechanized, industrialized process of killing, and this camp had 90,000 prisoners in it at any given time. So I think more than anything, what I took away from that trip was the realization that if we wait till we get to the point of killing centers and concentration camps, it really is too late. I mean, I was overwhelmed with the sense that when you are in a city and from your city you can actually see this factory of death with prisoners and with guards, you know, what does one person do at that point? How could I ever stop it at that point? And so I really came away from the trip with this renewed sense of the power and the worth of what we're doing teaching around the Holocaust. Because again, what we really have to focus on is making sure we never get to that point. And so in this country, where we are a democracy, where prosecutors and police officers, we all take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Arizona, we really have to make sure every single day that we are remembering our role and we're doing it to the best of our ability. Because again, when you get to the point where you have a camp with mass killings where ultimately 6 million Jews are being killed, at that point, you know, short of a world war, how are we ever going to stop it? So I want to tell you one of my favorite things about our program, and that's the challenge coin that we give our police officers and our prosecutors after they've taken the course. So a challenge coin, for those of you who don't know, a challenge coin is something very popular among police agencies, and it typically will have the motto of the police agency, and it'll have it'll have the agency name, and it might have some sort of saying with an image, and officers will carry them. If you do something good or worthwhile, you might get a challenge coin, but they trade them and they collect them. And so every student who takes our class, they get a challenge coin. And I want to tell you the story behind our challenge coin, because the story and the person that is honored with our challenge coin is really the person who inspires me and moves me in a way I think that you will understand when I tell you her story. Her name is Gerda Weissman Klein, and she is Jewish. She's now 95 years old, and she lives in Scottsdale. Gerda was born in 1924 in Poland, and in 1939, that's when the Germans invaded Poland. So Gerda and her brother and her parents went underground for about 3 years, and then in 1942, they were discovered, and they were rounded up, and they were taken to the Jewish ghetto. And from there, then Gerda's parents were taken away. She last saw them on a truck, never saw them again. They both were killed in the Holocaust. Same thing happened to her brother. He was taken away to another camp, and he also was killed in the Holocaust. And Gerda herself, between 1942 and 1945, she lived in a series of labor camps. And finally, in January of 1945, as now the Allied troops are advancing toward Germany, that's when the Nazis decide they're going to try to hide the evidence of these crimes, and they start destroying the camps, they start blowing up the camps, they try to blow up the gas chambers and some of the crematoria. But as part of this effort to hide now the evidence of their crimes, the Nazis begin what are called today the death marches, where they round up prisoners from the camps and they start marching them toward the interior of Germany. So Gerda becomes one of 4,000 women who are marched in 2 groups of 2 from January of 1945 until May of 1945. They are marched 350 miles, and of the original 4,000 women, only 120 survive, and Gerda is one of the 120. And they are marched through the dead of winter with nothing but the clothing on their backs and the shoes on their feet. But what Gerda remembers is early May 1945, now the Nazi captors have abandoned the few remaining women. The war's about to end, and so they leave these few remaining women in a warehouse in a small town. And Gerda recalls waking up one morning and going outside to get some water from a pump to bring water back to the other women. And as she's getting the water, she hears the sound of a motor, And when she looks up, there's a Jeep driving toward her with the American flag and two soldiers. And one of the soldiers gets out and comes up to Gerda and says, "Well, are there other women like you?" And Gerda says, "Yes." And then the soldier says, "Well, take me to them." And Gerda says, after 3 years, she's so used to the notion that to be Jewish is to be unworthy of life. She says to the soldier, "Well, there's something I must tell you first. I am Jewish. We are Jewish." And then the soldier is quiet for a moment, and then he says, "Well, I am Jewish too." Gerda then leads the soldier to the warehouse where he opens the door, holds the door open for Gerda. And Gerda says, at this point, she's 21 years old. Her hair has turned snow white. She's 68 pounds, and she hasn't had a bath in over 3 years. And it was that simple act of the American soldier holding the door open for her where her humanity began to be restored. Gerda's story is tragic, but it's also a beautiful love story because she and the soldier fall in love and get married, and he brings her back to the United States to his hometown of Buffalo, which Gerda will tell you is the most beautiful city in America, where Gerda and her husband make their life. They have 3 children and many grandchildren now, but Gerda really devoted her life to keeping the memory of the Holocaust alive. And so I met Gerda in actually February of 2012, right when we were launching our first class. And I met her because I attended a conference down in Phoenix where Gerda was our guest speaker. And the participants at the conference were prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement officers. And Gerda opened her comments to us by saying to us, "Thank you. You are my keepers of freedom." And I was really struck by that because I thought, Gerda's not a legal scholar, but she believes when she looks at judges and prosecutors and law enforcement officers, she sees us as her guardians of freedom. And why is that? And it's really then when things kind of clicked for me, when the work I'd been doing for the past 6 years around the Holocaust came together with Gerda's words to us, because that's when I really began to understand, again, prosecutors and law enforcement officers and judges, we all take an oath of office when we take this job, which is to defend and protect our Constitution. And I really came to understand that our Constitution and our democracy are only as strong and as healthy as how well each of us does our job every single day when we interact with members of the public and when we interact with each other. And so that became kind of my conviction and really my inspiration. So I shared Gerda's story with the other team members and our police chief and law enforcement community here in Yavapai County when we were first launching our course. And the decision was made then that we wanted everyone who takes this class to get a challenge coin that says on it, it says "Lessons from the Holocaust, Guardians of Freedom." And we have a little card that goes in with the coin. I'm going to read it to you. And it says, "The Guardians of Freedom coin is presented to participants in the course, What You Do Matters, Lessons from the Holocaust. Law enforcement officers and prosecutors are the living, breathing fabric of the Constitution of the United States of America. Examining the slippery slope that occurred with police in Nazi Germany powerfully reminds us of the critical and trusted role we perform today in guarding our freedoms." So we award this to all of our students, and just one story that I love, which is a few years ago, I was running between meetings. I had stopped to grab a sandwich at Subway out at Frontier Village, and a police officer that I didn't really recognize, he's with the Yavapai Prescott tribe. He recognized me and he came up and he says, "Miss Polk, I want to show you something." And then he starts digging in his pocket and he pulls out the challenge coin. And he says to me, "I want you to know that I carry this coin with me every single day to remind myself of the importance of doing the right thing even when no one is watching." So that's kind of the story behind the work that I and our team do around teaching from the Holocaust. As I said, we have, there's over 15,000 police officers in Arizona, and we've trained about 4,000 so far. So we have a wonderful project team that's very committed to reaching all of our criminal justice professionals in Arizona. And then meanwhile, we get requests from other states. So our team thinks big, and we are really looking at how we can expand to teach this and have it offered across the United States for all the folks who cannot go back to the Holocaust Museum. I feel committed and inspired by this work, and the reason I do, I think, is because I love Prescott so much, I love Yavapai County so much, I love Arizona so much, and I love our country so much. And I really do see that how our law enforcement professionals conduct themselves day in and day out really is integral to the survival and the health of our democracy. So that's the end of my comments. Thank you all for listening. It was my pleasure to be here at this luncheon with you. Thank you.